September 16th, 2019, that's when we started this amazing experiment, which is the Frontier Cabin here on the homestead. We wanted to not only figure out what it was like to build a cabin, what the tools were like and the materials, but what happens with the cabin over time. So we did the experiment, but the experiment continues on each and every day. We worked on coming up with the original concept, trying to come up with the kind of cabin that you would build either as a military encampment. Maybe the cabins at Valley Forge would be a good example of that. A cabin that somebody might build just for a season and then move on, or the kind of cabin you would build on your homestead while you were working on a bigger house. That's exactly what this cabin is. Somebody would live in this cabin for 6 months to maybe 3 to 5 years, and then they'd move out of that either into a bigger house or move on to another piece of ground. And this cabin might still be used after that, but it might be used as a smokehouse or as a barn or as a tool shed. So it's been 3 years. Let's talk about how this is held up. We built this out of tulip tree logs. And if you come to an area like this as someone on the frontier, you didn't bring your building materials with you. You have to build your house out of exactly what you've got: trees and the ground that they stand on. So this cabin is built with tulip tree logs, some of which were on this piece of property or very, very close to it. And the rest of this is all basically made out of mud. So really, it's not much so much as a log cabin as it's a stick in a mud cabin. So one of our big concerns right away on this was, were the logs going to hold up? Were they going to just rot right away, especially down at the bottom where, water kind of kicks up onto them? And so far, the logs have done great. Anything that's protected underneath the roof edge doesn't really show any rotting at all. If it extends beyond here, and some of these we kind of purposely extended beyond so you could hang things from them, you can start to see the logs rotting where the rain hits them constantly. So we'll probably have to saw them off right at the roof edge so that rot doesn't kind of continue to go back up the log. But so far, these logs are doing really well. These are just simple tulip tree logs that we've gotten from this property or properties very, very close to that, about a size that is easy to manhandle, and tulip tree logs are really easy to cut. So they were very, very popular for a log cabin like this. What about the gaps between the logs? How is this daubing worked out? And we don't really think about that when we kind of envision a log cabin today. When people build log cabins, they use a very modern material between the logs, because there's this gap. Sometimes it's 4 inches wide. So other times there's just a little bit of a gap. It varies all over the place. We use the historical technique of just putting little pieces of wood chip in here and then filling the gap with mud and sand mixed together. And it's really held up pretty amazingly well for just simple mud and sand and some wood chips. Any place where it's stayed dry, it's done a really, really good job. If the log is really green when this is put on, the log will shrink a little bit and you'll have a gap. If the logs have already shrunk down, then it isn't a problem at all. And even places where rain has hit this to a certain extent, you can see that it's kind of weathered a little bit. It's washed away the first 1/8 inch of clay, but after that, it's just fine. So as long as the logs don't shrink too much, no problem. Some of these places, well, we're gonna have to redo that because the stuff is just falling apart. It's amazing that we can use just what's given to us from the land to provide shelter. It couldn't get any simpler. The fireplace and the chimney were one of the most challenging and scariest parts of the build. Was it going to work? Was this just gonna fall apart immediately? I'd never built anything quite like this, and I haven't seen one built exactly like this. So it was kind of on the fly designing. And it's kind of scary in that you've built this structure, this whole log cabin, you built it nice and sturdy, and then you have to cut a giant hole in the back side of it. Okay, how's that going to work? And then we have to make lots and lots of this cob material. So it's clay, it's sand, it's straw mixed together, and we needed probably 2 tons of it to make this structure. How is that going to hold itself up? Can you imagine trying to make a clay castle, a mud castle, and you need it to go 12 feet up in the air and it needs to hold itself up? Yeah, there are logs on the outside of this, but those logs really only are there to kind of protect it from the weather. What's really holding it up is the clay itself once it dries up. So this whole process was one of truly experimental. Was it going to wash away the first time rain came along? What happens when we build a fire and it gets really, really hot? Will it collapse? Will it, crack? So far, it's been the most rewarding experiment of them all. I didn't know how it would turn out, and now we know after 3 years, it has done amazingly well. You can see right here in the back wall that, yeah, we're having some deteriorations. I've built just giant fires in here, much bigger than I would build in just about any fireplace. And yet we have just a little bit of deterioration in this back wall. It heats that clay up. It gets not quite to, like brick temperatures. And that's kind of the worst for clay. You've driven out all of the chemically bound water and it gets a little fragile back here. If I really needed to, I'd kind of patch it up, right? And it would make it a little bit better. Or I could put a big flat rock in the back if I wanted it to last longer. But I still want to keep working with this experiment. I really love this fireplace. Once the fire's been in it for an hour or so, it heats up the entire structure. It's all nice and warm. It reflects this heat into the cabin and it works so well, so comfy. If that isn't interesting, and it is, what's even more interesting is what's happening up top. This is probably the part of the chimney I was worried about the most, at the very, very top. Now we have added, a foot or 18 inches of chimney on this from our original build because we wanted to give it just a little bit higher, a little bit more draft. Generally though, it was working okay, even though it really stopped at about right here. The fireplace was still working fine. Works just a little bit better now, keeping a little bit more smoke out of the cabin when you've got a fire going on in here. But this very top was the part that I was worried about the most. Number one, I didn't want this part to catch on fire because it's the most exposed to the heat, which by the time it gets up here, there's hardly any heat really. And what happens when the rain hits the clay inside of this, it's kind of held up pretty neatly. Probably gets soft every time it rains, but it dries out soon enough. And if we had a fire going the entire time, it'd probably stay dry. So probably the biggest renovation or change that's happened to the cabin in these 3 years is what's happened to the roof itself. So we started off with a bark roof. The bark that came off of the logs that we used for the cabin, we used that bark to cover the roof, and that worked okay. It was great because the material was already available to us and it was quick and easy to put up. But if you read the accounts from the time period, that bark does not last very long, and we found out after 1 season that the bark was basically useless and the roof leaked like a sieve, and that we would have had to put almost the same amount of bark on it again for that cabin roof to work out. So we changed the roof which is probably what they would have done in the same time period, to a shake roof. And right now this is a white oak shake roof on top of this. They took a long time. We wouldn't have had time when we built this cabin in the first place to get all the shakes ready for roofing it. So it worked out just great. We had that, a season or two later to split all these shakes and then put them on. And this shake roof is amazingly waterproof. It's such a huge change from the bark. And I'm looking at it now thinking this shake roof will probably easily last 10 years. It's been 3 years since we started on the cabin, and the experiment continues. We continue to change what's happening with the cabin and learn and watch what's happening with that. And we add to the homestead. What would they need next? We've got the chicken fencing. We have something for livestock, the blacksmithing shop so that we can make tools, and the wood shop. You have to be able to make furniture. The smokehouse. How do we preserve food for the homestead come winter time? And how do we keep our cabin from collapsing on itself? What kind of roofing do we need? We just keep learning. We just keep experimenting. It's been a crazy 3 years since we first started putting cabin videos out on YouTube. And if you were there at the beginning, I would love to hear about that in the comments section, so make sure to chime in. And if this is your first video or your 1000th video, thank you for being part of the Townsends channel.